I wonder sometimes if the future of humanity is in the hands of humanity. What might it be in if it's not in the hands of humanity? Well, I like this idea of memetics. It might be in the ideas themselves. Maybe the human beings are just the hosts.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Shaun Conaway is a generative futurist, entrepreneur, filmmaker, and a phenomenological philosopher. His mission is to empower and accelerate the redesign of our failing systems to create an anti-fragile, anti-rival world. To this end, he helped to create the field of Generative Futurism, the practice of envisioning desirable futures at near and long timeframes. We begin this episode by exploring the genre of science fiction and how it can change the direction of a life and a whole civilization. We talk about the phenomenology of time, a practice of experiencing the present moment beyond what words and narrative can tell us about it. And so, we go into a short guided meditation that allows for this experience to be had instead of explained. Shaun then talks about the way we can imagine wildly improbable futures and the characteristics of leaders that go beyond titles, power, or fame. If you're hearing this podcast while running or driving, I recommend you take 5 minutes once we begin the meditation so that you can fully experience what phenomenology can teach us about being and time. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Shaun Conaway. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Victor. Really, really excited for this conversation.
So tell me about science fiction and your early days delving into that world.
I was a super dreamy kid, the one that was would try to get the back seat in the classroom so they could stare out the window and not get noticed. Or when I got a little bit older, I would try to sneak a book into the class. Instead of listening to class, I'd try to read the book. Actually, that worked for me then in high school once I got smart enough to pass all the tests without them, having to lecture me. They finally just let me alone. But I think I was a very dreamy human being, both spiritually and intellectually. And I think the everyday mundane world was just not that interesting to me. I wasn't interested in the games that kids played in the playground. I wasn't really all that interested in a lot of the things about the schoolwork unless they brought some idea of science or some kind of interesting historical fact. But the kind of day in and day out, color the earth brown and color the water blue, and I think that stuff was just completely uninteresting. So I think when I discovered science fiction, which must have been about the age of 10 or 11, I just felt like it was a portal into a world that I wanted to live in. So I read the books not because they were just great entertainment, but I really felt like almost like they were real places. And that for the time that I got to read that book, I got to go there. I got to be the hero. I got to experience what it would be like to and this is very unique to science fiction, especially 60s and 70s science fiction. I get to be the one that everything hinged upon the actions of this one character. And the one character had to have a kind of a blend of kind of moxie and savvy, intellect, but also kind of keen capacity to understand people's emotions or their energetic states and things like this. And so it really was maybe a foundational or prototypal experience I had as a kid where I wanted to be that first. And then later on, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a sci-fi writer. That's all I wanted to do is write about the future, write futuristic stories.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, and I'm recalling my first encounter with science fiction, and I think it's my first encounter with literature in general, which is Isaac Asimov's Foundation series,
and I think is on TV right now, which is just so cool.
Yeah. And we seldom, we always think about and tell everyone about the profound impact that science fiction stories could have. But in my case, I'm just realizing that, for me, it was really, really profound. Like probably the most important book I read, because it was the first book that opened so many doors for me. And I didn't realize that until now.
Yeah, and that one specifically because and like my work now is as a long-term generative futurist. I love talking about 100 years or 1,000 years out. And Foundation took on tens of thousands of years of human future. And the idea that Harry Seldon had a mathematical or a statistical approach to understand the likelihood or the probability of certain futures, and then over a long arc of time after his death, be able to shape that so it was less painful for the human race. I remember the thing is the foundation that the empire collapses, and either it's going to collapse and take all of humanity with it, or its collapse could be shortened. And that was his thing, is to shorten the amount of suffering that humanity have. What a grand vision. I mean, like my mind almost breaks when I think about Asimov, and also right now because of robots and the three laws of robotics, and now dealing with AI. Can they do those three laws? Can they not harm humans? Can they do what humans say? And can they have self-preservation without violating the first two rules? I mean, just think about it, it's so prophetic. And he was writing those books, 50s and 60s. And it's like you can think about it in terms of like, oh, you respect his intellect, his ability to think about these things, which he obviously had some raw horsepower and intellect, and also ability to understand, hard science, because he's one of these hard science fiction writers. But it's this imagination capacity. And if you look at science fiction, you look at, kind of going back, Marie Shelley and Frankenstein to me is like the first science fiction book, amazing. Then Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, these people that really just had this imagination capacity that still is kind of mind blowing, because they didn't have anybody else around them to copy. They just pulled this stuff out of their mind about the future. And now, of course, in my work, that's like the thing that we're trying to train people to do the most, is to be able to imagine, wildly different or maybe wildly improbable futures, so that we can have the capacity to find ones that might work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Foundation, they wanted to shorten the amount of time that we're going through the dark ages, and that
right.
he wanted to do it in 1,000 years,
Yeah.
which I think it's also prophetic, because we, in these times where we believe that a solution will come up, and in 2-3 years, humanity will turn around. And I don't think so. We've been building the way we live and we are for so many centuries that, I think it's probably very reductionistic to talk about a dark age or a light age. But nevertheless, any transition will take centuries too. And I think we have to coming to terms with that, because probably we won't be here to see all the things that we are transitioning right now. You and I, as, let's say, I don't know, change makers or whatever you want to call us.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect. If we're inventing futures or working on futures that we will never see, then it has an added benefit in the sense that, well, maybe I won't design it to benefit me. One of the things that human beings are pretty reliable for is, I can invent something new, but I'm just going to at least 1 or 2% stack the deck for me and mine, right? And it's the stacking the deck for me and mine that gets in the basic underpinning of these systems. And then those things get exaggerated over time. Thinking about capitalism, what a radical breakthrough! What an amazing up-leveling from the prior systems of aristocrats owning land and being able to lease land and these things, to actually everybody being able to be an owner of things, ideas and land and things like that. And then the marketplace becoming not just a physical place, but a commons where things could be exchanged. But embedded in that was the old system, which was, to make the aristocrats still in power. And to the day we have, maybe a different kind of aristocrat. Maybe they're .com aristocrats now, or high-tech aristocrats, or whatever. But there's this capacity for that system to exaggerate the thing that got embedded in it. So if we can think about how would we design systems for a few generations, maybe even 10 generations ahead of us, then maybe we can get our ego out of it, our own attachment to how it goes. I want to talk a little bit about what you said about this long-term evolution. One of the things that we certainly have very little capacity to anticipate is how long it takes to make these very large changes. One of the things that's so horrific about climate change is that it's happening much faster than the human beings can ingest that it's happening and change or react to it's happening. And we've seen it, for 20, 30 years now, where, really large parts of our population just denied it. And even today, I wrote an editorial on Medium maybe a month or so ago, and I've got a pretty good following on there. And in it, I talked about the climate crisis, and I got a direct email from a reader saying that he was no longer going to read my articles because I was part of this cabal of people trying to fool people that climate change was real. And you look at that and you think, wow, well, our mental space, our kind of own operating system takes a long time to upgrade. And I mean, as a species. One thing that's interesting to me, though, is that there are these long, sweeping arcs of things evolving and changing, but there are state changes. So I mentioned capitalism. Certainly at the same time, around that time, democracy becoming a newly experimental form of government, representational democracy, going away from parliamentary ideas to really, really kind of representative government. It was radical in its time, and it kind of swept across the major social institutions in the United States and France, of course, first, most famously. And it was such a better system and such a better way to actually have people come together and do this kind of system of deciding things together. I mean, really, not without a king coming in and saying, "Oh, you guys thought about it for a while, now I'll make the decision." But no, they really got to make the ideas, and that maybe no one person should hold the power. We should have, in the United States, we had this balance of power idea, that we'd have the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive branches that would balance each other out and keep this kind of power thing from happening. Now, of course, here we are 225 years later, and it's breaking down. It was a horse and buggy invention. Had representatives that got on their horse and their buggy and went to the state capitol to represent, the local interests. And then the people from the state capitol get in their horse and buggy and go to Washington to represent the state's interest. And so this need of a representation or representatives was profoundly central to the model. If I couldn't get my views heard at the state or at the capitol, then I didn't have democracy. So I had to trust somebody to do that on my behalf. Now, whether they were trustworthy or not, we could let the historians get into that. But now it doesn't make any sense. I mean, why do I need my interests represented by somebody that I don't even know and haven't met and don't even have a sense of whether they're going to actually align with my values? So in let's say a representational democratic model, let's not even talk about changing the model completely, but just think about an evolutionary step. Let's say there's some way to with AI and technology, anticipate whether I have a certain amount of expertise in any kind of area and whether I would be one of the constituents of direct democratic action around a topic. Well, we could do that. I mean, we have AI now that can pretty much source that. If we combine that with human checks and seeing if somebody actually has expertise, I could, with my phone right now, vote on a number of topics, actually be a representative of my country or my state, or if it was the United States, or my region or province, wherever you're from. I could represent. I wouldn't, and I could maybe be elected or not be elected, but there's so many different ways that I could interface with governing. Now, our systems right now don't allow that because they're these old models and they're tied to this tradition. In fact, we level up the tradition. The United States, they talk about the Constitution all the time, but Jefferson said it should be rewritten, right? The Bill of Rights should be rewritten, very frequently, every 10 years or so. We never quite did that. But what I'm thinking about right now is that there is the slow evolution, but there's also the state change. And, we could certainly look forward, especially in futurism, we could start to talk about what are the most likely state changes. By the way, some of them are negative. The rise of authoritarianism. Some futurists would say, hey, look, authoritarianism is actually a very stable form of government. If China wants to stop using coal, you know what they do? They stop using coal. They have authoritarianism. They have the ability to completely, without consulting anybody, make a rule up and change the rule and change life for people. So there are some futurists that say, hey, authoritarianism actually might be an effective form of government if we want to stop climate change, for example. I won't go that far myself, but there is the capacity to have state change. So these things are ways where very quickly, and if you think about democracy and capitalism, really it's within a 50-year period, basically everything changed around the planet. 50 years is still a pretty long time for us who only live 80 to 100, but in terms of hundreds of years, it's much smaller. So the way that we progress and evolve into the future is not linear. And it has these cycles, these ups and down swings. And so predicting how long it might take to get somewhere in the future is really difficult. Those of us who are more hopeful in terms of the future, we're banking on some state changes, some moments where we actually have these leaps forward, both in our understanding, maybe our capacity as human beings, and in the systems that support us.
Yeah. And talking about fiction, it's funny how, we do live in a story, and it's actually our capacity to keep believing in stories that we invent purposely, not only that we read from our culture and our values, but we sit down and write as a science fiction book that will allow us to invent those possible futures without any proof whatsoever. The same way Isaac Asimov and the like pull it out, and it's funny because it's at the same that it's the only way to move forward. It's also very dangerous and potentially catastrophic because we don't know who we are, and we don't know what we're capable of, because we are evolutionary beings that are very much ingrained in very, I would say, I will use this word, primitive emotions, and we are very much moved through fear and jealousy and vengeance, that those books, those stories are not, it could go any possible way.
Yeah. Thinking about like Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, it's like such an amazing story. It's so compelling when I read it when I was young, but when I began to understand the politics behind it, I was horrified. Like, oh my goodness, she's actually talking about a return to a aristocratic industrial, group of people controlling everything. By the way, if you're an Ayn Rand fan, I hope I didn't offend you by that really quick summarization. Obviously, she was a great thinker and had a lot to say that's probably very valuable. Yeah, so here's something that just kind of makes my mind kind of spin in a very happy way, is that I wonder sometimes if the future of humanity is in the hands of humanity. What might it be if it's not in the hands of humanity? Well, I like this idea of memetics. It might be in the ideas themselves. Maybe the human beings are just the hosts. Maybe we're just the hosts that allow the virus of the good ideas to spread, bad ideas as well. But if you think about these things like democracy or capitalism, as we spoke about, they were economic wonky things that got written. And Adam Smith's work was he probably was as surprised as anybody else. Anybody actually read his stuff, And I know for myself and other writers who write in kind of philosophical disciplines, it's kind of shocking when somebody actually reads it. I mean, more than like the 10 people that always read it and comment and argue with you about things. But I know for myself, like in my own thinking, the reading I did in science fiction, the study I did as a Buddhist practitioner and with Buddhist teachers and other great, philosophers and teachers of our time, and then my own study, my own really diving into reading the source documentation from a lot of philosophers and stuff, I could feel the ideas coming together in my head. And so many times I open my mouth to speak and something comes out that surprises me. Now, it doesn't surprise me because it's not something that can't be reversed engineered. I can't look at the idea and say, oh, that just came out of the blue. Nobody's ever thought that before or said that before. Because if I do look, I say, wow, it's got a legacy of thinking from this person or that person or this experience. But the surprising part is that very often there's not an experience of, in me at least, of authorship. More, it's like you and I are talking and then suddenly an idea comes out. And then later I go back and I go, wow, that was crazy. Where did that come from? And I think this for me is the experience of maybe it's the ideas that are propagating forward through time. I mean, we are thinking and conceptual beings. That's an extraordinary thing and extraordinarily rare in the universe. I'm beginning to think that life may be very, very common. But in the way that we conceive of things, or the way that we have a phenomenological experience of the world, of our own consciousness and things going around it, that might be at least exceedingly rare, if not impossibly rare. So in that regard, the things we are talking about are ideas that shape the way in which we sit on this planet and interact on this planet. there are a lot of human beings here, and there's a lot of different ideas running them. There's human beings that are running around with Hammurabi's code, an eye for an eye, working in their brains to think about justice. Well, when Hammurabi's code came out, it was a radical invention. It standardized punishments. It was the first time we got to standardize punishments. We said, look, if you do this thing, it should have a standard punishment. It shouldn't just be like, whatever you want to punish the guy with, do it. So it should be some kind of incremental and just punishment. Well, that was great, 2,000 years ago. And by the way, that dates off. I'll have to go back to my brain and not remember Hammurabi's time. But that was radical then. Now it's just, like primitive. It's like almost barbaric, the kinds of jurisprudence invested in that idea. But that idea set's still running out there. And there's still people that run and operate on it. And so if you look at how unevenly these principles and ideas are deployed, well, it's almost as if the ideas are in a incubator, and they're running human hardware to see what works best. Now, ideas don't have their own awareness or self-awareness, but it is a very interesting way to look at this. And I think for thinkers, for people who like to deeply consider this thing, it's a worthy topic of your consideration. And I'll tell you why, and I'll say specifically why for me. When I speak about things that I want to transmit forward. I don't want to be a virus for ideas that I don't want to live out in the world. This got so acute for me at one point. I actually remember I had a conversation with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and we were arguing about something, and he said, look, we can't put that out there. We're talking about some kind of communications and things. We can't put that out there because we can't yet be accountable for blowback or for weaponization. Blowback is unintended consequences, right? When you do something that has unintended consequences, or weaponization is you put an idea out there you think is great, but somebody uses that idea and turns it on its head and turns it into something that poisons the well. And so after this conversation, which was very intense, I actually went down and I wrote a lexicon for myself. I believe there's about 160 terms in this lexicon. And I wrote down all the language I was using. I wrote what the word was. I wrote as much as I could about what maybe people said about it or how I said it and what I meant by it. Because I wanted to make sure that when I spoke, I was clear that I was speaking from a self-knowledge, that the idea wasn't just using me, that I made a handshake with the idea. Okay, I agree with you, and I'm going to pass you forward. So if you think in terms of this, like these ideas are using you, first of all, you could be scared by that. I don't think it's scary, but there is a consent factor. If you consent to an idea using you, then be a champion of that idea, expand it, make it more effective, argue about it, share it with people. And then maybe that's the way that state changes happen. Maybe that's the way democracy got loose. Maybe that's the way that capitalism made its state change. Maybe that's the way Hammurabi's code came about. Enough people for 50 years talking about how crazy the judicial system is, and anybody can get any punishment for anything, and we should standardize this stuff. You get to see them sitting around arguing about it, and then somebody says, let's tell King Hammurabi about this idea we've got. And somebody told him, he's like, let's do it. Like all of the things that have ever happened seems to have happened in some fashion of that little play that I put together for you.
Yeah, I'm picturing you as a young boy in the classroom, staring out the window. Like in a sense, part of you is there receiving these ideas, and part of you is not there, just daydreaming in a sense. Tell me something. When you say phenomenological philosopher, or when you do phenomenology, how do you explain that, and how do you this is an experiential way of being in the experience. So how do you explain it, and how do you live it?
Yeah. So the easiest way to get phenomenological across is as lived. So there's theoretical knowledge and theoretical philosophy. We might argue about knowledge. What is knowledge would be a great example. So, looking at what is knowledge, we have to decide what's knowing. We have to decide, is there a unit of knowledge? There's all these things. But when we learn something, we don't measure those unit of knowledge. We don't even ask ourselves, am I learning, right? So, learning is something that's knowledge. Epistemology is kind of in the world of theory. And it really helps us understand the world. Nothing wrong with that at all. but there's a sense in the phenomenological philosophers, Husserl and Heidegger, I'm thinking of too, Merleau-Ponty, these philosophers said, look, maybe we should just stop for a minute. And they said to bracket our preconceived ideas about the world, and then just confront the phenomena as they come up. And how are we going to confront them as a human being? Like with our senses, with our ability to think about something, with our ability to discuss them. We're going to do that and try to move away this preconceived knowledge, this preconceived understanding. And so when I talk about being a phenomenologist, I talk about that. And it really goes well with my Buddhist training, which is really about what we in phenomenology we say phenomenological consciousness, like being aware of the fact that I'm conscious. Well, Buddhist meditation is to try to get you to be aware of being this conscious instant, like what's going on right now. So all of our, maybe mindfulness practices or these kinds of meditation practices are really just about, can I experience what it's like to be conscious right now and right now and right now? For me, phenomenology is it's a creating a sandbox so that my imagination and intellect don't get put in service of things that aren't serviceable for human beings. I really want to think about things in terms of spiritual practice or intellectual practice, philosophical distinguishing. I want to think about things in terms that other human beings can learn something from them. They can have some experience. And so, and maybe that's also, maybe that's also how I'm made up. Maybe that's part of my beingness, is that I'm not an analytic philosopher. I'm not a theoretical philosopher. I'm very much about this human life. And you can apply that to almost anything. You can really look deeply. My daughter's studying the philosophy, economics, and politics, and we were talking about GDP this morning, and she said, there's a lot of research that ties democracy and capitalism to increase GDP. And I said, well, that's fantastic, except if there's a couple of billionaires and 200 million starving people, the GDP is still high, but there's still people starving. And so how do we get to that phenomenological experience? What is the experience of being a human being? Because if we can't account for that in our philosophy, then we end up in what do they call statistics? Lies, and damn lies, or something like that. Or lies, damn lies, and statistics is the saying, right? So, yeah, thank you for asking. A lot of people don't know that word. Another part of the phenomenological philosophy aspect is ontology, which is a study of being. And ontology breaks down to a couple of ontologies. There's the ontology of being, which can describe anything. And then there's the ontology of being a human being. What is the being for being a human being? And the only way I know to get at accurately what is a being for being a human being is phenomenologically. The being of being a human being can only be known by being a human being. And it's a funny thing to say, but you have to create domains of understanding, I think, especially if you're interested in furthering your own thinking about things. You have to create a domain and be willing to explore that domain really fully. The great thing is, in this era, there's so much great philosophy out there and so many philosophers that have delineated these courts that it's very, very easy to very quickly get up on the court and become a player.
Yeah, wow. And phenomenology, in a sense, it's also trying to break the not break, but expose the limits of language. Language is also a level of abstraction, and we think that the word means the thing, but it's not. It's just a label. Do you guide meditations? I remember a professor when we were talking about Husserl and Heidegger, that he said, like, let's try to point the present time with our fingers. Let's just trying to pin it down in the table, and you realize that there's no such thing as getting to the present. How can you, or I don't know if you want to do it here, to guide us into some sort of phenomenological experience, so that we can not use words and just try to being the being that we try to be.
Yeah, great. Let's do it. Let's deal with time. Since this is my favorite areas to explore. Um, and if you're listening to this, you can just close your eyes for this because it'll help to not take in the sensory input from around you. And just as you with your eyes closed, just sense for a minute your body. Sense your breath, breathing going in and out, and keeping your mind on your breath, realizing that your breath is never stopping. It's hardly ever conscious, but it is a really good indicator of the domain of now. You said we can't exactly pinpoint now. That's because the human being runs between a half and 3 seconds behind the sensory input that comes to us. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, and maybe you can bring something to mind where something happened in front of you and you just couldn't process it. And then you processed it, and it's almost like something just appeared in front of you, like something appeared. Maybe you thought you saw a jacket laying on the road as you're walking towards it. And then suddenly it was a dog and it scared you. Now, this is the brain's delay in processing. So human beings don't get to be in the instant now, we call it. But we have an experience of now. And if you just sense this moment, this moment since you closed your eyes, that's something we described as the ongoing now. And ongoing nows kind of follow one after the other, and they have some cohesiveness to it. Maybe if you think about it before you close your eyes, there was an ongoing now that was present that was replaced by this ongoing now. And maybe we even created a new ongoing now when I started talking about ongoing now. There's a sense of expanded now that is the domain of being a human being. And the really interesting thing is if you just sit here for a minute, you'll begin to understand that you've never experienced a thought or a feeling or have taken an action that's outside of the domain of your ongoing now. Now, we have a past. We have memories of things that have happened before, photographs of ourselves as a child, but it's pretty clear that we can't be in the past. In fact, as a phenomenological exercise right now, I'd like for you on the snap of my fingers to go back 10 years into your past. 1, 2, 3. Is everybody still with me, or did somebody actually go 10 years back into the past? Now, we all know the answer to that. It's kind of funny, but if I actually ask you to experience it, you realize that, well, it's possible for me to recall the past or think about the past. It's actually impossible for me to go to the past. So what is this thing that we call the past? Well, I have a distinction for it. I call it the ever-present past. The ever-present past is the present that's with us in this ongoing now. And it contains whatever we're thinking about our past. Maybe I say, hey, do you remember learning to ride a bike? Or maybe your first bike. And now in your ongoing now, you have an ever-present past piece called me riding my bike or getting on that bike. It wasn't there a few minutes ago. Where was it? Well, it wasn't anywhere because the past isn't a place. Now, we have the feeling that the past exists, but it only exists now. What about the future? Where does the future exist? Now, every morning we wake up and we think, I've got a new day. I've got to get on, I get dressed, get a shower, go to work. But if you really examine carefully, at the end of the day, when you go to bed, what proof do you have that tomorrow will happen? And where would you go to examine that proof? Well, the ironic thing is you'd have to go into the past to try to figure out if you had a future. Well, how can the future actually exist in the past? That doesn't make any sense at all. So I say that we have a superstition that there's a future. We have a superstition that seems in a phenomenological way, seems to occur over and over again. And the seeming is it seems to occur because if we look into our past, we woke up almost every morning. So if we think about the future, now I want you to think about something you got plans to do. Maybe something you're going to do in a month or so, some trip you're going to take or some important meeting or maybe an anniversary. Think about it just for a minute. And bring it to mind. Who's going to be there? Where is it going to be? Is it going to be in the daytime or in the evening? What kind of clothes would you wear? Would you be happy? Would you be a bit sad? Is it a reunion or a new meeting? Are you going to go someplace you've never been before? So as you think about all those things, you can bring them to mind. It's pretty clear those things don't exist in the future. They exist now. So I call this the ever-present future. So in any ongoing now, we always have an ever-present past and an ever-present future. It's pretty clear that that's the way human beings operate. And if anybody has an experience otherwise, please write me. I'd love to know about it. But if you think for a moment, who imagined the past? And who imagined the future? Well, that's the phenomenological consciousness, this awareness that I am the one that imagined the past, and I am the one that imagined the future. And that's what I have. That's all I have of the past and future. That's a pretty extraordinary power. So if we're extraordinarily power in regards to imagining our past, imagining our future, how come we do the same thing over and over again? How come we always imagine our past the same? How come we don't go and curate our past and find experiences and things that we did that we forgot about? Maybe things that allow us to have gifts or access to skills and capacities we forgot we had. Oh yeah, I remembered one day. I was a great salesman when I was 9. Now I have it. I'm not a great salesman, but in my past, I've got some evidence that I was. Wow, if I want to be a salesman in the future, that would be a really handy past to have. So we can curate the past because we're the one imagining it. And then, of course, as we've been talking about, the future itself is nothing but imagination. But how well do we imagine? Really, how well do we imagine? Or how much do we imagine a future that's just like today? You have within you this amazing power to create fantastical futures for yourself and for humanity. And you do that all in this present moment. So you can open your eyes. And if you'll do me a favor after this podcast, if you'll just write on a piece of paper, make a circle, and then on one side of it, write ever-present past. On the other side of it, write ever-present future. And just put a dot in the minute. You can in the middle, you can just say me if you want to have identity be a part of it. And then just look at that and understand that this is the only way you have ever experienced reality from the moment you are conscious to the moment you die. This is it. This is the human being's domain. This now that's ongoing. It drives me crazy when spiritual teachers say, be here now. It's like, try to be somewhere else in now. Now, what they mean is be present, be in that consciousness of the experience of the moment. But be here now is a really horrible set of words to explain it because there is nothing a human being can do. It is inescapable that we are always in the vicinity of now, usually about a half a second to 3 seconds late. That's okay. It's part of the human experience. These very small understandings of our experience are actually not very widely shared. We have all these superstitions about what it is to be conscious, about what it is to be a human being, what time is. We abuse time horribly. We treat time like space. Do you have enough time? I'm going to save some time. Does time pass quickly or does time pass slowly? These are all descriptions of space. They're not descriptions of time. I mean, the only time you have is right now. How can there be any more or any less of it? It's not a quantity thing. It is an experiential thing. So to my more radical students, I challenge them and say, maybe you're not a being of space. You're actually a being of time. That's something to consider just for yourself. We'll not go too deep in that, but maybe the essential element of who a human being is time rather than space. I'm time having a spatial experience would be the way to put that.
Mm. Yeah, and it's funny because at least when you close your eyes and you go just to be aware of the breath, there's there's an experience of space too, of expansion, and it cannot be contained in a sense. And once you talk about it, it dissolves in a sense, but it's just some sort of feeling that's there. I wonder, if we are not the dominant species in the world, as we've put ourselves and we believed ourselves to be for thousands of years now. And this circle, when we are there, and you say this is a human being's domain, this is what human beings, they inhabit that. How to reconcile this different levels of domains that exist in this planet, and potentially in other exoplanets and exoplaces.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and I'll it kind of helps to distinguish this, because we talk about 3 dimensions of space. Sometimes we say 1 dimension of time. In the block universe model, it kind of works. There's some real problems with that, because time is not consistent in the universe. There's no now everywhere in the universe simultaneously, because of the rate of change of time is variable. The rate of change of time is variable, and the rate of passing of time is variable. Therefore, it's impossible to measure it in 2 places independent of the places. There's no place where you could stand to measure time in 2 places. You can only measure time in another place by your own time, which means it's relative. Once it's relative, then they're no longer the same. So it's kind of fun to think of those as 4 dimensions, though. And then I one of the things that helps me in this conversation, and by the way, I'm now going to enter into a belief, and I have some great teachings and some great experiences to back up this belief, but I want to make sure that we know that this is a thing that's certainly a domain of belief. And that I believe that consciousness itself is one of the fundamental qualities of the universe. Like by qualities, I mean, if you take water, wetness is a quality of water. It's just one of the qualities. You cannot go into a lake and not get wet. It's a quality of water. If you're in water, you're wet. So one of the qualities, I would say, of the universe is consciousness. Now, I don't mean human consciousness. I don't even mean sapiens consciousness, which is to be self-aware in some way. I mean this kind of larger notion of, well, in Buddhism, we call it, Rigpa, bodhicitta, Buddha nature, this self-existing awareness, this sense that there is, not with a being like God having a consciousness, but that this notion of consciousness exists out in the world, exists out in the universe as a quality. And if you can take that leap with me, then you can begin to maybe even see consciousness as a 5th dimension. We have the 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, which is not measurable except for right where you are in your precious moment, as I call it. And then we have consciousness. And the very interesting thing about doing that is the minute that we remove the consciousness from being an emergent quality of a human being or an emergent quality of our brain. By the way, if you're following right now all the debates about can neuroscience find the seat of consciousness in the brain, the answer is pretty much no. We cannot. We've not found any part or piece that holds on to consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean it's possible we won't. But if you were to imagine for a moment that consciousness is not our thing, it's not even a planet Earth thing. It's not a thing that I have and you have, and when you're dead, you don't have. But it's a quality of the universe itself. Well, then this whole dualistic notion of what's conscious and what's not just falls away. And the whole notion of, are we the only conscious beings? Are there extraterrestrials that are consciousness? Or are there more spiritually evolved? Or less spiritually evolved? No, you just actually begin to understand that it's in the very fabric of all existence, at least in this universe as we know it. That would be some way through this. And what I like about that is it's a little bit of an elegant solution, because it does a rug pull to all of the debates we have about who we are and how we stand on the universal stage. If we are just an expression of universal consciousness, then our brotherhood, so to speak, our neighbors, our close relatives, is everything else. It's all of the universe. It's every bit of creation. That's probably not the words. Every bit of existence, every bit of existence that's there is our neighbor, because we are exactly the same. And then we begin to dissolve in terms of having boundaries. If it's not my consciousness, if they're not my ideas, then they're just consciousness and ideas, as we talked about earlier, ideas flowing through me, ones that I champion and ones that I don't. At least for me, this takes a real weight off my shoulders. It makes it, and I know like I want to make sure we're not getting in the world of the divine. I don't really want to talk about the divine. I'm going to take the Buddha's way out on this one, say I don't talk about the creator, I talk about the divine. But I do want to say that in light of maybe the move away from a religious definition of the divine, this is a really palatable notion of this kind of greater consciousness, right? We don't have any words for it. This greater level that God used to reside in, is that we can begin to say, well, it's all consciousness, and I am an expression of that consciousness, not like a thought or a word or a deed. And Michael, Shaun, you go in this direction, you obey like this, but in a very, very incredibly expansive way. You talked about the experience when we close our eyes and feel expansive. I think that may be at the root of that experience. And by the way, there's a long way around to get back to your comment. When you close your eyes and you feel that sense of expansiveness, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the experience of universal consciousness, not like a thing, but that it's out there and everywhere. And a lot of meditations I guide people on are to literally imagine yourself expanding to the size of the universe. And this allows this kind of dissolving of the boundaries of your specific existence and maybe the fundamental existence of all existence.
Wow. I'm picturing my the listeners. They might be now running in the sidewalk or driving in their cars, and if you give enough space for your words to come in, we are dissolving into traffic. We are dissolving into trees we are surrounded with, and this is also that's the cool thing about words and stories, that we tend to go to psychedelics to get this feeling or deep meditation, but even words that dissolve themselves while they are being said out loud gives it to. So thank you for providing that experience, that it's always there. But the attention is what makes it possible to perceive.
And there's a teaching tradition here as well. I mean, what I'm doing when I'm speaking, it's not just what I'm saying, it's I can invoke that experience of me. Like the hairs rise on the ends of my arms, and suddenly I start to feel boundaryless, and I speak from that state. So it's a transmission of state. And so my teacher, my main guru, he passed away in the mid-90s. His name was Choku Rijin Rinpoche. And he did this amazing thing called the pointing out instruction. And he would say, I'm going to lift my hand up in the air, and then I'm going to let my hand hit the table in front of me. And when my hand hits the table, you're going to be in the presence of your natural state of mind. And he would just do it. Boom. And then he'd raise his hand and say, I'm going to raise my hand. And then I'm going to let my hand fall to the desk. And the minute my hand hits the desk, you're going to be in the presence of your natural mind. And he would do it for hours, and just again and again and again demonstrate that experience. And eventually all of it just started to blur. I mean, you didn't know how many times he had raised his hand and let it hit the desk. And after a while, it didn't feel like there was a break in the experience of that expanded, dissolved consciousness, awakened mind. It didn't feel like there was a break from one smack of the hand on the table to the next. No thoughts would arise. No anticipation would arise anymore. And it wasn't because of the hand and the desk. Well, no, it's because of him. And his teacher before him did that for him. And so we human beings have the capacity to transmit much more than just words. Words really help, especially right now. We've got a big planet that we can speak around. Even look at us, like we're communicating to a really wide audience. And this is probably a second podcast, but like who are we? What is our being in regards to what we're saying? And if you get back to why did I write the lexicon? I wanted to be responsible not just only for the words, but for who I was being when I said those words.
Thank you, Michael, Shaun. Thank you. I want to explore with you this notion. You're, on top of all the labels that that you put yourself as creator, filmmaker, community gatherer, whatever. I want to explore this notion of the leader. Leader as healer, and leader in the business space, and leader in the community space, and it's funny because what I'm, now that we are breaking with these notions of spatial arrangements and hierarchies, how will the notion of leadership evolve as this property of community? Yeah, as you said, wetness is a property of water. Leadership is also, in a sense, a property of community. In the way we have constructed our social structures. How to keep evolving this term of leader?
Yeah, two things I think are really important for this moment in time. We can go back into the past and we can look at how leadership was enacted and what kinds of leadership were really important. We can look at Kennedy and making declarations of futures that wouldn't happen without, or Martin Luther King or Mandela. And in each one of those cases, there were great leaders. In this period of time, I think that's not what's needed. I think we need the capacity of leadership that is not attached to a person or a title. So at what moment do I lead? Well, the moment I lead is when I have the capacity to lead, given the circumstances I'm in. The moment those circumstances change, my leadership is no longer needed. This is the biggest lesson for us right now, because our ego gets so wrapped up in being the leader, and it becomes a hierarchical thing. There are hierarchies. There are natural hierarchies. There's natural hierarchical leadership. I don't think we have to work too hard to do that. It comes very natural. Relinquishing leadership is a very much more challenging thing, and a more advanced practice if you're being willing to know when to let go of the leadership. There's another model that's actually an ancient model, at least it's an indigenous model, and that's what I was taught, is the leadership of the stag. Now, the stag does not lead the deer into the meadow. The stag follows behind, often staying on higher ground to be able to watch out, to make sure the space is safe. This is a really different model is from the kind of Western, leader out in front, follow me, I'm going to get the vision, we're going to charge. This is, I'm going to hold back, and I'm going to keep my attention broad. I'm going to keep my focus very loose, and I'm going to hold space. We say that now in modern circles, holding space. Well, holding space actually might be the greatest leadership capacity. And when we're being most of service is when we can hold space, when we can look out for a couple of things. One, threat, of course, but that's probably not so important. But especially if we can look out for newness arising. Because see, newness is these things where things combine in ways that are unexpected. And if nobody's watching, the newness will rise and then it'll never get written down. Nobody will ever recognize it. And then it'll have to come up, 100 more times in 100 different circumstances. But if we can begin to be leaders by listening for what's arising, from what's emerging, and then noting it, say, hey, before y'all run on down the path, did you just notice something had happened? There was a moment where, and I think that's a really profound version of leadership. It's a wisdom style of leadership that our species, the human species, is very, very much in need of. Yeah. We are so inclined to taking talking points from other speakers, from other leaders, and not inclined to sit back and listen and see what emerges. It's a switch that, from our other conversation, that meditation often brings about. If you're quiet and being in this ongoing now, very, very close to the instant of now, if you're in that space, then you might notice things that others might notice. And I would call that leadership.
So you've been close to a lot of leaders in many realms, from the Tony Robbins to the Peter Diamandis to the Dalai Lama, and many others. Without naming any names, but how do you see these people relinquishing a self-image and a self-portrayal of who they are perceived to be, knowing that this notion of leadership as holding space goes beyond their name, their image, their social media handle?
Yeah, that's such a good question. First, I'm gonna make a disclaimer in that I don't know anybody well enough to actually know what goes on inside of their internal experience. All the people you mentioned, I have this huge, profound respect for. All of them have made mistakes, as long as we're clear. Mistakes in leadership, mistakes personally, all of these things, as we all do. But there's a quality I notice in the Dalai Lama for sure, like on a 10 out of 10 level. Certainly Tony Robbins, and many of the leaders that I lead with. Thinking about Jack Canfield, which before I met him, I wouldn't have anticipated that any of these guys. That I'm going to use a term that's one of my terms, and maybe the listeners out there will know this from their own experience. If not, I'll try to explain it a little bit. This is a quality of in the present moment being called into being. So there's a thing that we are every day kind of going around. I just, made dinner with my wife and my daughter's over here and I'm enjoying it. And then I got to go hang out with my friend Victor on a podcast. But the minute you sit down and ask me a question, suddenly all that shit goes away. And I'm in that sense of listening. I'm listening to the questions, and I'm not just listening to your questions. I'm listening to what's arising in me. And that thing that's arising in me has me become something that's appropriate to the thing I'm about to say. That's why I can lead meditation in these things, because I'm not reading a script. I'm not, it's not a rehearsed thing. It's just really what's coming up, so in the 80s, they called it channeling. I just call it, becoming the thing that needs to be become in the moment. So there are people out there that are called into being, that the universe calls them into being. And we talk sometimes about the states of consciousness, or these stages of consciousness. And the fourth stage of consciousness, in my thinking, is this expansive, unlimited consciousness. Expansive because of that feeling you said when you close your eyes and you feel it expanded. That's one piece. And unlimited, not I get something unlimited, but my availability is unlimited. I'm available for whatever needs to happen in an unlimited way, whatever needs to come out of my mouth. I am not going to be a filter. I'm just going to be here and be present. And I'm completely available in an unlimited capacity for whatever needs to pour through me. So some of these leaders are like that. Tony Robbins, when he's on stage and he's, going a million miles in that minute, he is being exactly what he's called to be in that moment. Now, is it that way all the time? No, he's not that way all the time. Is the Dalai Lama that way all the time? No, he's not that way all the time. Months ago, he made a huge blunder. Can anybody do that? Absolutely. Most of the time, we stumble over ourselves. We step on our own shoestrings. We think something, I wonder if they'll like me. Boom, it's done. We know, identity has now come up, ego's gotten in the way, and there's no more of that unlimited, expansive being. But you can, through practice, maybe getting a teacher or somebody to help you to understand, help you to see what it's like. If you get the experience of it often enough, you can become it. Let's make a little disclaimer. The ultimate level of consciousness in all these traditions is enlightenment, which is beyond unlimited, expansive. It's allness, whatever. And I think, maybe from time to time we have some experiences of that. I'm not talking about being in that state of consciousness and leadership. I'm not really sure how that works out. I know that Buddhas have to go buy groceries. I do. I know they have to sleep and things like that. But I'm not going to say I know the world well enough to describe it. But in the unlimited expansive, which is this level right below, which is that I'm still an identity. There's still some consciousness just happening in this this space over here, thisness, there's some, awareness of this happening in this localized environment, but what's coming through it is not being filtered or constrained, and that my commitment to it is that thing where it's happening is an unlimited quality. And we don't get to do it all the time. Even those of us who do it a lot, we don't get to do it all the time. Because the universe is not knocking at the door. Sometimes it's knocking, and sometimes it's knocking loud, saying, the universe is saying, hey, I need to come through here. And you're like, okay, I'm here, I'm ready. I'm out of the way, let's go. And then sometimes, you're trying to figure out whether you should get up early enough to do the full workout, or if you can get away with a little workout, or, all the little mundane things that we have to deal with as human beings.
Yeah, but that's the funny thing. Like we allow the universe to come through us when we have a camera, when we need to perform, when we need to close a deal, and the mundane stuff, which is dealing with your spouse or dealing with your kids or dealing with your dog or buying groceries, which, by the way, is where we spend most of our time. It's a great opportunity, the enlightenment on the mundane, and probably being more asleep when you're on stage. Probably shifting a bit the perspective might illuminate a few other curious things about the process. And I don't know. I'm sure that when we stop recording the call, the atmosphere here will change immediately. And that's something that the funny thing is that in the universe, it won't happen anything more than just hitting stop on the recording thing. And at the same time, we are manipulating so many forces and energies, or not manipulating, but allowing or not allowing, or just so that's so powerful, and at the same time so perplexing.
It's human. Yeah, I mean, it's like no matter how spiritually evolved you are, unless you're willing to let the body drop away, which means dying, you still have this human experience. And we have all these patterns in us, our language patterns, our patterns of how we are with our spouse, our patterns of how we are grocery shopping or doing other things. But you can upgrade all those spaces. You can bring, first of all, the most simple thing you can do is bring loving kindness to all of them. Like loving kindness is like one of the, it's if you want a miracle cure all for everything, just add a little loving kindness to everything. So that's love with this capacity that there's a gentleness and kindness to it. Compassion is also like that, it's a different one of those things. Yeah. And then my background's in Zen and Japanese Buddhism, where we talk about chopping wood and carrying water. And that means that everything you do you do a Zen mind. There's actually a term in Japanese martial arts called zanshin. It means continuing mind or continuing presence. And the way it was described to me the best was that, in Japan, they have this kind of opera called kabuki, and it's with the white face paint and very traditional garments. And it's said that the master kabuki performer does not lose their I guess we'd say in English, our character, their being in the being of the story. They don't lose that even when they pass behind a wall. In other words, even when the audience can no longer see them, they hold this zanshin, this continuous spirit quality to them. And if I want to say something, we'll get off this call, and then my love won't be for all the people of the world that we're talking to. My love will just be for you. And it'll be instantaneous, like you say. And I'll have that feeling of love and generosity too. But there's a state change there. I just want to make sure everybody's okay with that. There's nothing wrong with not being enlightened, enlightened and holding the whole universe inside even every given moment. It's probably not even practical to think in terms of that way. But by taking this term zanshin, and think about this continuing spirit. Maybe we should just call it that. I don't need to know the Japanese, but that the spirit that we have, and I mean, by spirit, I don't mean like a soul. I mean, the spirit of the thing. So I'm talking in a way, I've got a tone of voice. There's a spirit of the thing that's generous and kind and expanded. If I can continue the spirit of the thing into the next thing I do, That doesn't mean I have to be inspired or inspiring or anything like that. But if I can keep that feeling, and maybe the feeling of the expanded heart, I mean, I can feel that sensation in my heart, that sense of expansion. I think that I don't say that as, I'm not saying that as a response to what you said, but I'm saying that in terms of something that we can attend to in a phenomenological way, something that we can attend to see if we can practice that long enough that it becomes a habit.
Well, I think that's a good invitation for science fiction writers to try to write those possibilities instead of, you know, I won't describe the whole genre, but you know, going beyond the force of good fighting the force of evil, and all these dynamics of stories that we have been you know, rewriting across millennia. I think science fiction, it does have a lot of that, but you know, merging it with the technological possibilities that we now have and can now even dream beyond what they dreamt 100 years ago, and merging this, what you just described, with which goes beyond words, to put it into those stories and merge it with the practical way that we're living now with airplanes and AI and Zoom calls. I think it will be very cool, and probably will transcend also the written page, and will go into our screens, and it will go into our ears, and that will also change the virtual selves that we are, through this possibility of boundlessness and of continual consciousness, and I don't know how you called it,
Zanshin.
Zanshin. Yeah, through the ones and zeros that make possible this call, and the audio that's been recorded and then replayed several times throughout time and space.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, I hope you've been affected by it. I hope it's had a material impact on you, not just an intellectual impact, but a material impact. In that regard, the world is a mysterious place, that you and I are here in this ongoing now present moment with one another. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. I'm pretty sure that I'm seeing a good representation in front of you. I can sense you and feel you. But what's amazing is somebody could be listening to this in 10 years and be sensing and feeling this moment in their current moment, that this thing actually arrives in their ongoing now and has just become a new thing again. That's only our generation have ever had that capacity. I mean, you could write a book that would do that, but boy, it had to travel a long way and it had to be unpacked line by line. But this thing we're doing now, I mean, we have some amazing powers, some amazing gifts and ways to share. And I'm very thankful to be alive in this moment in time.
Me too, my friend. Thank you so much. And also play with the possibility of, after the recording gets saved on the hard drive, also the beautiful possibility of just hitting delete, and that won't mean that these won't exist. That's the beautiful thing. Thank you so much for sharing this space, sharing this time, sharing this energy, sharing this language, and sharing this silence. And yeah, it's enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. You know, these as you can imagine, these things don't come up around dinner table conversation often, sometimes, depending on who I'm with, but it's a real gift to be in a space where we can deeply explore topics. It's a very, very precious thing. And if you're a listener to this, you know, Victor's show is a very, very precious thing. So please appreciate it and please enjoy it.
Thank you. Likewise, I'll put your links on the show notes so that everyone can delve deeper into your gift. And yeah, thank you so much. Now we are hitting stop. Bye-bye.